The hearing room buzzed with tension. Rows of reporters, aides, and political analysts filled the seats, their eyes locked on the dais where Senator J.D. Vance adjusted his microphone. Today's hearing before the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation promised to be a fiery one. The air crackled with anticipation. The topic? Oversight of the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, and the agency's controversial new guidelines on inclusive language. At precisely 9 a.m., the gavel slammed. Senator Maria Cantwell, the committee chair, cleared her throat. "The hearing will come to order," she announced, her voice steady but cautious. "Today, we welcome Mr. Philip Reynolds, the recently appointed administrator of the FAA, to discuss the agency's operational performance and recent policy changes." All eyes shifted to the witness table where Reynolds, a tall man with neatly combed silver hair and a crisp navy blue suit, adjusted his glasses. Despite his calm exterior, the tension in his posture was unmistakable. He knew he was about to be grilled, and J.D. Vance, the Ohio senator known for his blunt style, wasn't one to pull punches. "Mr. Reynolds," Cantwell continued, "please rise and raise your right hand." After swearing him in, she yielded the floor to Vance. The Ohio senator leaned forward, his face a mask of cool determination. "Mr. Reynolds," he began, his voice cutting through the room. "In recent months, the FAA has rolled out new guidelines instructing personnel to replace so-called offensive aviation terms. Words like cockpit are now deemed too gendered, and manpower is out. Instead, you want employees to say flight deck and human power. Is that correct?" Reynolds hesitated. "We've updated our language to reflect a more inclusive. Just a yes or no will do," Vance interrupted, his tone sharpened. "Yes, Senator," Reynolds admitted, shifting in his seat. Vance exhaled quietly. "And how exactly does changing cockpit to flight deck make our skies safer?" His voice, steady but laced with skepticism, echoed in the chamber. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. Reynolds clasped his hands. "Language matters, Senator. This policy reflects our commitment to fostering a welcoming environment for all employees." "But what about the pilots?" Vance interjected. "The ones responsible for keeping passengers alive at 35,000 feet. Are you seriously suggesting that they care more about inclusive language than operational efficiency?" Reynolds' face tightened. "We're not sacrificing safety. Then why waste resources policing words instead of fixing the real problems?" Vance fired back. "Flight delays are at record highs. Pilot shortages are getting worse, and you're here talking about semantics?" For the first time, Reynolds looked rattled. Cameras flashed as journalists scribbled furiously. Vance pressed on. "Mr. Reynolds, do you believe the average American traveler feels safer knowing the FAA is more worried about word choices than runway maintenance?" The FAA chief's lips thinned. "We believe fostering an inclusive environment enhances performance." Vance chuckled coldly. "Performance? Tell that to the thousands of Americans stranded in airports last Christmas because the FAA couldn't manage air traffic control properly." He paused, letting the words hang. "Mr. Reynolds, the public expects competence, not word games." A long silence followed. From the corner of the room, a veteran pilot shook his head. It was clear Vance had struck a nerve. The senator sat back, allowing his words to settle over the room like a heavy cloud. This wasn't just about language. For Vance, it was about a deeper concern. A government so obsessed with ideology that it was losing sight of its most basic responsibilities. And he wasn't about to let that slide. Senator Vance leaned forward again, his eyes locked on Reynolds like a hawk sizing up its prey. He tapped his pen against a stack of FAA reports, the rhythmic sound punctuating the charged silence. "Let's talk about priorities, Mr. Reynolds," Vance continued, his voice smooth but relentless. "Your agency receives over $18 billion in taxpayer money annually. And instead of focusing on fixing outdated air traffic systems, you're busy rewriting language guides. Do you think that's a responsible use of public funds?" Reynolds shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. "Senator, Fostering an inclusive workplace is an essential part of our mission. Your mission, Vance interrupted, his tone sharpening, is to ensure safe and efficient air travel, not to be the language police. He held up a document. I have a memo here, dated last October, where the FAA instructed employees to stop using the term airman and replace it with aviator. Was this directive approved under your leadership? Reynolds hesitated. It was part of a broader initiative. Yes or no, Mr. Reynolds? Yes, Reynolds admitted through clenched teeth. Vance nodded, as if he had just proven his point. And while you were busy editing language, the FAA's air traffic control staffing crisis worsened. Isn't it true that the agency is short by more than 3,000 controllers, which is directly contributing to increased flight delays and cancellations? Reynolds' face tightened. We're addressing the staffing issues, Senator. Hiring and training take time. Vance scoffed softly. Time? Americans don't have the luxury of waiting while bureaucrats play word games. Families are missing weddings. Soldiers can't return home for the holidays. And you're focused on replacing cockpit with flight deck. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Even some of the other senators shifted uncomfortably. Reynolds looked down at his notes, his facade of calm cracking under the pressure. Vance wasn't finished. Let me remind you of something, he said, voice lowering to a near growl. When a pilot is in the middle of an emergency, engine failure, fire, cabin depressurization, they're not thinking about the inclusive terminology guide. They're thinking about saving lives. The words hung heavy in the air. Reynolds opened his mouth to respond, but Vance pressed on. Do you know what pilots are telling me? Vance asked, scanning the room. They say this language push is a distraction. They're spending more time on mandatory diversity seminars than on emergency preparedness drills. Does that sound like a smart trade-off to you? Reynolds' throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. We value both operational readiness and workplace culture, but you're failing at both. Vance cut in sharply. And the American people deserve better. Across the room, reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks. The story was writing itself. A fiery showdown between a no-nonsense senator and a bureaucrat tangled in red tape. Senator Cantwell shifted in her chair. Senator Vance, she said cautiously, let's keep the focus on the broader mission of the FAA. This is the broader mission. Vance shot back, unyielding. Public safety is at stake here, and Mr. Reynolds' priorities are completely out of touch. Reynolds tried to regain his composure. We take all feedback seriously. I'm sure you do, Vance said, voice dripping with skepticism. But the public isn't interested in platitudes. They want action. And right now, all they're getting from your agency is a lot of empty talk. He leaned back, his point made. The room felt colder somehow, like everyone had just witnessed the scales tip. Vance wasn't merely criticizing the FAA's policies. He was making the case that bureaucratic obsession with ideology was putting lives at risk. And in a country where trust in institutions was already fragile, his words struck a chord. At the far end of the hearing room, a woman in a flight attendant's uniform whispered to a colleague, "Finally, someone's saying it." The air in the chamber grew heavier as Senator Vance allowed his last words to linger. Across the table, Philip Reynolds shifted in his seat, the weight of the exchange pressing down on him. But Vance wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The senator flipped to another page in his binder and adjusted his microphone. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, his voice crisp, "you've repeatedly claimed that these language changes enhance workplace culture. But I want to read you a statement from Captain Mark Ellison, 35 years of service with 2 major airlines. Here's what he said, and I quote, 'I don't care what you call the cockpit. I care if the guy next to me knows how to land the plane when things go south.' Do you understand that sentiment?" Vance asked, his eyes boring into Reynolds. Reynolds inhaled deeply. "I understand the concerns of experienced professionals, Senator. But it's possible to maintain operational excellence while fostering a workplace where all employees feel valued and respected." Respected? Vance's eyebrows shot up. "You think the traveling public cares whether pilots feel respected, when they're sitting on the tarmac for hours because your agency can't manage staffing properly? The murmurs in the room grew louder. Several aides exchanged knowing glances. Vance was landing blow after blow, and Reynolds' defenses were crumbling. You say you can focus on both operational safety and cultural sensitivity, Vance continued. Yet, just last year, an FAA systems failure grounded over 11,000 flights. That's the first time since 9/11 that every commercial aircraft was held on the ground nationwide. Can you explain to this committee why, despite your focus on inclusivity, these catastrophic failures are happening under your watch? Reynolds' face reddened. Senator, that incident was due to a database corruption error. A corruption error? Vance repeated incredulously. And instead of investing resources into fixing critical systems like NOTAM, he referred to the Notice to Air Mission System. You're spending taxpayer dollars on diversity audits and language rewrites. How does that make sense? Reynolds fumbled with his notes. We are actively modernizing our systems. Modernizing? Vance scoffed, leaning forward again. The FAA is still running technology from the 1990s. But instead of addressing that, you're prioritizing feel-good initiatives that don't make one single flight safer. A brief silence followed, one that seemed to stretch endlessly for Reynolds. He was losing control of the narrative, and everyone knew it. Mr. Reynolds, Vance said after a beat, his voice cooler now, more surgical. Can you confirm how much the FAA has spent on these inclusive language policies? Reynolds hesitated too long. I'll help you out, Vance said, lifting a report. Your agency spent $2.5 million last year alone on equity and inclusion training, money that could have funded dozens of new air traffic controllers. Tell me, do you think a stranded family in Cleveland cares about your inclusive glossary while they sleep on an airport floor? Reynolds opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The room held its breath. Vance pressed on, seizing the moment. The American people want to know if the skies are safe. And right now, Mr. Reynolds, it looks like the FAA is more concerned about political correctness than preventing the next aviation disaster. A ripple of quiet applause came from the public section. Reynolds flinched. Vance had cornered him, and the damage was done. The senator sat back, satisfied for now, but the fire in his eyes said he wasn't close to being finished. Senator Vance let the silence stretch, the weight of his words hanging thick in the air. Across the room, reporters typed feverishly, capturing the clash between the no-nonsense senator and the embattled FAA chief. Reynolds shifted again, his hands gripping the table's edge as if bracing for impact. Vance wasn't about to let him off the hook. He flipped to another section of his binder, his voice steady but cutting. Mr. Reynolds, you claim these language changes are minor and cost-effective. Yet, according to your own documents, the FAA is diverting staff hours, hundreds of them, to re-review technical manuals and retrain employees on inclusive terminology. He lifted a memo and read aloud. Employees must complete mandatory training to adopt the new inclusive communication guidelines, with an emphasis on avoiding terms perceived as gendered, hierarchical, or exclusionary. Vance dropped the paper back onto the table. That's real work hours spent, not on air safety but on language. Do you really expect the American people to believe this isn't a distraction? Reynolds cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. Senator, we believe a modern workplace reflects the diversity of the country we serve. This language initiative supports that. Vance's lip curled in a half-smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. Spoken like a true bureaucrat. But let's cut through the corporate buzzwords. While you're fine-tuning language guides, major airports are reporting near-miss incidents at alarming rates. Just last month at JFK, 2 planes came within 300 feet of colliding because your air traffic control system is overburdened. How do you justify spending resources on language policing while American lives are at risk? Reynolds fumbled for a response. Safety is our top priority. Is it? Vance shot back, his voice rising slightly. Because from where I'm sitting, your top priority seems to be satisfying ideological agendas. A ripple of murmurs swept through the chamber. Several senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Across the table, Reynolds' face tightened as he struggled to maintain composure. Vance continued, his tone unwavering. Let's talk about recruitment. The FAA is facing a historic shortage of air traffic controllers, which directly contributes to delayed and canceled flights. And yet, instead of streamlining the hiring process, your agency is prioritizing diversity quotas over competency. Can you confirm that applicants now undergo mandatory cultural competency assessments before even being considered for technical roles? Reynolds hesitated. We use comprehensive evaluation criteria to ensure fairness. Fairness. Vance's voice dripped with sarcasm. The only thing the American people want to be fair is their ability to fly safely from one place to another. No one cares if the person guiding their plane uses gender-neutral language. They care if that person is qualified and alert. So, again, how does this policy enhance public safety? Reynolds' mouth opened and closed, but no immediate answer came. The chamber was deathly quiet. Vance leaned in, delivering the blow. You're playing a dangerous game with people's lives, Mr. Reynolds. And the clock is ticking toward disaster. For a moment, no one moved. The weight of the confrontation felt palpable. A bureaucrat defending theory against a senator armed with the reality of public outrage. Vance, satisfied that his point had landed, relaxed his posture but kept his gaze locked on Reynolds. Let's be very clear, he said coldly. The American people expect the FAA to prioritize their safety, not social experiments. If you can't, or won't, do that, maybe it's time for someone else to lead this agency. Reynolds' jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He knew the truth as well as anyone else in the room. Vance had seized the upper hand, and there was no easy escape. Senator Vance sat back for a moment, letting the pressure simmer. The silence in the chamber was thick, every eye fixed on the unfolding spectacle. Reynolds' face was pale, his carefully rehearsed talking points unraveling under Vance's relentless assault. But Vance wasn't about to let up. He adjusted his microphone and leaned forward again, his voice low but commanding. Mr. Reynolds, let me remind you, this isn't an academic exercise. This is the real world, where lives hang in the balance. And while your agency obsesses over terminology, the public is paying the price. Let me give you another example. Vance flipped to a highlighted report and began to read. January 2024. A regional flight from Dallas nearly collided with a private jet during final approach. The official investigation found controller fatigue and staff shortages as primary causes. And yet, during this same period, the FAA spent over $400,000 on language inclusivity programs and employee re-education. Are you seriously telling this committee that's a responsible use of resources? Reynolds fumbled with his papers, clearly struggling to regain control. Senator, that incident was thoroughly investigated, and we've implemented new oversight protocols. New protocols? Vance interrupted sharply. That's bureaucratic jargon for too little, too late. And while you're bogged down in semantics, hardworking Americans are wondering if the next time they fly, it'll be their last. The words landed like a hammer blow. A tense hush fell over the room. Even Reynolds' closest aides looked rattled. Vance shifted tactics, his tone softening, but his words still carrying an edge. You know, Mr. Reynolds, I've spoken with pilots, with air traffic controllers. And do you know what they tell me? He paused, allowing the weight of his question to settle. They tell me they're terrified. Terrified that your agency is too distracted by ideological agendas to focus on keeping planes in the sky. He tapped the table with his index finger for emphasis. These aren't politicians or bureaucrats. They're the men and women who live this reality every single day. What do you say to them? For the first time, Reynolds hesitated without answering. The facade of authority he had entered with was crumbling under the relentless scrutiny. Vance didn't wait for a response. He pressed on, his voice now filled with controlled fury. What do you say to the family whose flight was delayed because you didn't have enough controllers? What do you say to the mother who missed her child's last hospital visit? Or to the soldier who couldn't make it home because you were too busy rewriting the word airman in your manuals? Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, his polished bureaucratic answers failing him. "We are committed to improving both safety and inclusion, Senator." "That's not good enough," Vance snapped, cutting him off. "This is not a boardroom diversity seminar. This is life and death. And frankly, the American people are tired of hearing excuses while your agency spirals into dysfunction." He let the words hang there, heavy and damning. Across the room, even some of the other senators seemed impressed by the intensity of his argument. Vance delivered the final blow with surgical precision. "Let me be clear. If the FAA continues down this path, if your agency prioritizes political correctness over safety, there will be consequences. Not just for you, Mr. Reynolds, but for every traveler who steps onto a plane. And I, for one, will not sit by while that happens." He paused, his eyes sweeping the chamber. "Mark my words, this isn't the end of this conversation." Reynolds, visibly shaken, shifted in his seat but said nothing. He knew that no amount of corporate spin could undo the damage done here today. Senator Vance leaned back in his chair, satisfied that he had not only made his case, but had exposed the deep flaws in the FAA's current leadership. The hearing adjourned shortly after, but the fallout was just beginning. News outlets wasted no time broadcasting the explosive exchange. Social media buzzed with clips of Vance's takedown, many calling it a masterclass in holding government bureaucrats accountable. For Philip Reynolds, the day had been a disaster. But for Senator J.D. Vance, it was a defining moment. A clear signal that he wasn't afraid to challenge the system when the stakes were highest. And as the cameras faded and the audience filed out, one thing was clear. The battle between ideology and safety was far from over, and Vance wasn't backing down.